where to register? Now, I think the key point here is, do you need to register everywhere? I would say you don't, unless you're a pharmaceutical manufacturer, unless you're Apple, unless you're a good which is truly used, or indeed a service that's truly used in every country around the world, or you have designs on it, maybe you're McDonald's, then I suspect you don't really need to register everywhere around the world. I think you need to be choosy, and you need to choose wisely. If we look at those in terms of maybe a services delivery and a goods delivery, think about if you're an online services provider, think about your main site. Where are you delivering those services from? Now, if it's the .com, then in theory, anyone around the world could look at that site and think, oh yeah, that's kind of the global universal .com that everybody has if it's a site that's intended to point to the world. So they may try and access that site, but unless your site is in their language, unless the site takes currency from that country, then it's very unlikely that people are actually going to purchase those services from your site. Of course, if you wanted to point your services to a specific country, then you add the currency, you use the local language, or maybe even you get yourself a local domain name, and that's really saying, hey, I'm targeting you as a country in terms of where I want to sell my services. Now, even though you're an online services provider, you may well have a relationship with a local, say, software implementer in that country, because people do need some level of local software setup in order to access your online services. Now, that, of course, is where you are then asking somebody in a local jurisdiction to go and attend to those services under that brand. So that's a key trigger point there, I think, where you may need to think about, actually, I do need a brand here. And because I'm going to have a contractual relationship with someone in that country to deal with that brand. Now, if you're selling goods, now, of course, use of a trademark includes the manufacture and the sale of those goods. So if you're selling goods into a country, then yes, you certainly do need a trademark in there, otherwise you may find yourself infringing somebody else's rights. But then also another important factor there is if you're manufacturing goods in a country, those goods will have the mark applied to them in that country, and that's use of the trademark just as much as selling is. So again, it's very important to have a trademark if you're manufacturing in that country. You've also got to think about who is doing the selling for you. Maybe you've got a local distributor, maybe you've got a local agent, and then again, you're going to have a contractual relationship with somebody in a country to use that brand for you. Now, the interesting thing about that contractual relationship is it will probably have maybe New Zealand as a governing law. Now, enforcing a contract across into a different jurisdiction, which has a different law to possibly the local law, that's not a simple task. That will be quite complicated. The advantage of having a trademark registration is you will be acting with a local right in that local country. So then it becomes a much more simple process of enforcing that. So here we go, where to register. So the key point is not to register everywhere. You've got to think about where's important to you. Where are you actively selling into? But also think about the future. Where in the future do you see your market expanding to? You may well see yourself as setting up a business in New Zealand and then say, well, actually, ultimately, then I'm going to roll out to Australia, really want to sell in the US because I think there's a great market there, and possibly Europe. Right at the start, you then need to be thinking about, well, actually, would it change my brand choice if that market rollout plan didn't really work? Because I could only go as far as Australia, and then actually that brand isn't free in the US and it's not free in Europe. So maybe there's a bit of future planning there that needs to be put into place to make sure that that brand is available in those 4 markets before you take the first steps in New Zealand. A good example of that is the supermarket Aldi, which is an Australian, but it's not here yet. Aldi religiously files all of its brands over here because it operates the market where it has lots of sub-brands. They are all filed over here. So the moment that Aldi wants to come into New Zealand, it can. Its trademarks are all there. They've all been cleared. They've gone through that process of being examined and gone through to registration. So it means it can step into this market relatively easily in terms of the IP protection. The final, just one other point actually in terms of trademark protection is getting a registration is all very well. It does act as a deterrent, but ultimately if you're putting a trademark registration protection into a country where you wouldn't necessarily take action, you wouldn't necessarily sue somebody, or you definitely wouldn't take action, then again, query the cost benefit there in terms of spending the money to get the registered right, when actually you wouldn't necessarily use it if push came to shove.